I can't believe this. This changes everything.
If you have ever loved someone completely, trusted them with everything you had, your time, your work, your future, and then watched them use the moment of your greatest grief to make their move, then you already understand what this story is about before I say another word. Her name is Serena Mitchell, and the morning her husband chose to act against her was the morning she buried her mother. He thought he had chosen the perfect moment. He had chosen the wrong woman entirely. Before we get into today's story, drop your thoughts, your feelings, and your lessons in the comments below. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Like the video and subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Now let us get into it. Serena Mitchell was born Serena Harris in Memphis, Tennessee, to a woman named Gloria Harris, a retired schoolteacher who worked every shift she could find for over a decade to give her daughter every possible advantage. Serena grew up watching her mother carry more than her share and still find a way to hold her head up. When Serena graduated from Howard University in Washington, D.C. with an accounting degree, she moved to Atlanta and quietly became the financial architect behind her husband's $14 million real estate company. She was not famous for this. She was not celebrated for it. But she built it. And she was building on the blueprint her mother had laid down long before she had the words for it. Memphis, Tennessee. A Tuesday morning in October. The kind of morning that sits gray and low over the city. Gloria Harris's funeral. Former students of Gloria's who were now grown adults had driven in from other states to be there. At the very front of all of them, standing closest to the grave, was Serena. Black dress, yellow roses. And 20 feet behind her, Deshaun had already stepped back from the burial with his phone pressed to his ear. She heard his footsteps moving through the wet grass. She did not turn around. She had already decided not to. Because 3 years before that funeral, Serena had started building something. A folder she named after. Inside it, 19 years of documented financial work, a forensic accountant named David Chen who had reviewed every record, an attorney named Patricia Morse who had been waiting for Serena's phone call for 2 full years, and a sealed envelope, written in Serena's own handwriting, 18 months before anyone served any legal papers, that contained a number. Deshaun believed her grief would slow her down. He had been misreading her for 19 years. This time, it was going to cost him everything. Stay with me. This story starts in Memphis. It starts with a woman named Gloria Harris, and it starts 19 years before Deshaun stepped away from a grave in the rain and thought he had finally made his move. Before we go back to the beginning of this story, I want to ask you 3 questions. These are the 3 questions this story will answer. And if you stay with me until the end, you will have the answers to all 3. Question 1. What does a woman do when the person she trusted most uses her lowest moment to make his move? The person she built a life with, built a business with, built a family with, uses the single lowest moment of her life, the morning she buries her mother, to file documents he believes she will not notice until it is too late. That is what Deshaun Mitchell did. He waited until you were standing over the freshest wound of your life, and then made his move. What does a woman do when grief is the weapon being used against her? Question 2. How do you build a case against someone who controls all the money? How do you protect yourself from someone who holds all the structural power when you are still living in the same house, sleeping in the same bed, making coffee in the same kitchen every morning, without making a single move that tips your hand, without giving him one reason to believe that anything has changed? How do you fight someone who controls everything from the inside? The answer involves a manila folder, 19 years of meticulous documentation, and a forensic accountant who spent 4 months reading records that told a story Deshaun had spent 5 years trying to bury. And the third question, this is the one that will keep you here until the very end. What had she already put in motion before he even knew the game had started? Because Serena did not start building her case after the funeral. She started 3 years before. 3 years before the funeral. 3 years before Deshaun thought he had won. And when you find out what she had already built, you will understand something about preparation and patience that you will carry with you long after this video is over. Stay with me. This story begins in Memphis. It begins with a woman named Gloria Harris. And it starts 19 years before Deshaun stepped away from a grave in the rain and thought he had finally made his move. To understand what Serena Mitchell did, you first have to understand where she came from. And where she came from was a house on the south side of Memphis, Tennessee, in a neighborhood where the houses were small and the expectations were enormous. The kind of neighborhood where every mother on the block knew your name and every grandmother on the porch had an opinion about how you were being raised. Serena Harris was born the only child of Gloria Harris, a woman who had decided very early in life that whatever she could not give her daughter in money, she was going to give her in preparation. Gloria had grown up in college, and Gloria had decided that her daughter was going to arrive at that college with enough behind her to focus on her education and nothing else. Serena knew about the waitressing. She knew because some Friday nights she would fall asleep doing her homework at the kitchen table and wake up at midnight to the sound of her mother coming through the door still in her uniform, and Gloria would cover her with a blanket and turn off the lamp without waking her. Serena was a light sleeper. She was never fully asleep. She always knew, and she never said anything, because the only way to honor what her mother was doing was to be worth it. Serena graduated at the top of her class from her Memphis high school in May of 1991. She had a full academic scholarship to Howard University in Washington, D.C. She had applied to 7 schools. She got into 5. She chose Howard because Gloria had a cousin who had gone there in the 1960s and had come home carrying herself differently. That was how Gloria had described it. She carries herself differently now, like she knows things. That was what Gloria wanted for Serena. Not just a degree, not just a job, the kind of deep knowing that changes the way you move through the world. The morning Serena left for Washington, D.C. with 2 suitcases and a backpack, Gloria stood in the driveway and watched until the car taking her to the airport turned the corner. Then she went inside and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Howard University changed Serena in every way Gloria had hoped for, and in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Serena had always been good with numbers, quiet, precise, capable of holding multiple financial threads in her head at once without losing any of them. At Howard, she discovered that this was not a skill. It was a gift. Her accounting professors noticed it within the first semester. One of them, a professor who had spent 15 years as a forensic accountant before returning to teach, told Serena at the end of her first year that she had a quality he rarely saw in students. She could read a set of numbers and hear what was missing. Not just what was there, what was not there. That particular ability, the ability to notice absence, was going to matter more than either of them could have predicted 19 years later in an Atlanta conference room. She graduated from Howard University in the spring of 1995 with a degree in accounting and moved to Atlanta. She took a position as a junior accountant at a mid-sized commercial real estate firm. She was 22 years old. She was the youngest person in the office. She kept her head down, did her work with a precision that drew attention from her seniors, and called Gloria every Sunday evening without fail. Those Sunday calls were the one constant in a life that was otherwise moving very fast. Serena told her mother about the numbers. Gloria told Serena about her students. It was the best part of both their weeks. She met Serena Mitchell in the fall of 1997 at a real estate industry event in Midtown Atlanta. He was 31 years old, for years into building a small property development company with a business partner named Jerome Hayes. He was charming and focused, and he spoke about his business with the kind of specific confidence that Serena respected. Not bluster, not exaggeration, but actual knowledge delivered with actual conviction. They talked for 2 hours at that event. They had dinner the following Friday. By the following spring, they were together in a way that both of them understood was serious. Serena called Gloria after that first dinner and told her about him. Gloria asked 4 questions. She asked what he was building, whether he owned it or was leasing it, how he talked about the people who worked for him, and whether he had ever asked Serena a single question about her own work. Serena answered all 4. Gloria listened carefully. She did not say what she was thinking. She filed it away. They were married in June of 1999. Serena was 26 years old. The wedding was in Atlanta. Gloria flew up from Memphis and wore a pale blue dress and cried twice. Once during the ceremony and once during the first dance, though she would later tell Serena she was not crying about the wedding. She was crying because the little girl who used to fall asleep at the kitchen table was standing in a room full of people who did not yet know who she really was. That was what Gloria said. That was the thing that made her cry. Not the dress or the music or the flowers. The fact that the people in that room were going to have to spend years learning what Gloria already knew. She kissed Serena on the cheek after the reception and flew back to Memphis the next morning. She called every Sunday. In the first years of the marriage, Serena continued working at the real estate firm while Deshaun and Jerome expanded the Caldwell Group. That was the name of their company, from a handful of residential properties into a growing portfolio of commercial real estate across the Atlanta metro area. Serena was not on the Caldwell Group payroll in those early years. But in the evenings and on weekends, she was doing Deshawn's books, cleaning up his financial records, which were organized the way a man organizes things when he is very good at acquiring things and not particularly interested in documentation. Serena was interested in documentation. She built his filing systems from scratch. She created the tracking spreadsheets. She set up the accounting structures that the company would run on for the next 2 decades. She did this because she was his wife and she believed in what he was building, and also because she could not look at a set of disorganized numbers without needing to fix them. It was not a decision. It was a reflex. By 2003, the Caldwell Group had grown enough that Deshawn asked Serena to come on full-time. She left her position at the firm and joined the Caldwell Group as its head of financial operations. Her title on paper was Chief Financial Officer. Her name was in the company documents. She had a salary. But the way the company was structured, Deshawn and Jerome were the principals and the public face, and Serena was the infrastructure. She built the budgeting models that told them which properties to acquire and which to pass on. She built the cash flow analysis that kept them solvent through 2 significant market downturns. She managed the banking relationships, the investor reporting, the tax strategy, and the internal auditing processes. When the Caldwell Group grew from a $2 million operation to a $14 million operation over the next 16 years, it grew on the foundation she had built and maintained and repaired every time it needed repairing. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The nature of the work meant that Serena was deeply embedded in every financial decision the company made, but rarely visible in the room where those decisions were announced. Deshawn was the one who stood at the podium at the industry events. Deshawn was the one whose name appeared in the Atlanta Business Chronicle profiles. Serena was the one who, the night before any major acquisition, had run the numbers 6 different ways to make sure the deal was sound. She was the one who had flagged the clause in a 2009 purchase contract that would have cost the company $400,000 if it had gone unnoticed. She was the one who had restructured the company's debt in 2011 in a way that saved them from defaulting on 2 properties. She was the most important person in the company. She was also the least famous one. She told Gloria about this dynamic over the years, in pieces, the way you tell someone something that you are still processing yourself. One Sunday evening in 2007, Serena mentioned that Deshawn had done an interview with a local business publication and had not mentioned her by name once in the entire piece, though 2 of the 3 business decisions he described had been her analysis and her recommendation. There was a long pause on the phone. Then Gloria said, "Baby, I want to ask you something and I want you to think about it before you answer. Are you building this for him? Or are you building it for yourself?" Serena did not answer that night. She told her mother she would think about it. The honest answer, the one she arrived at slowly, was that she was building it because she was good at it and because she believed in the work. But she was beginning to understand that believing in the work was not the same thing as being protected by it. The shift happened in the spring of 2015. The Caldwell Group was in the middle of its largest acquisition to date, a commercial property complex in Buckhead that would become the centerpiece of the company's portfolio. Serena had spent 4 months analyzing the deal. She had built the financial model that justified the purchase price. She had negotiated the financing terms with 2 separate lenders. She had identified and resolved a title issue that could have derailed the entire transaction. On the day of the closing, at the celebration dinner Deshawn had arranged, Deshawn stood up and gave a toast in which he thanked Jerome, thanked the attorneys, thanked the lenders, thanked the 2 junior analysts. He did not mention Serena. She was sitting 3 seats away from him. She watched him sit back down. She picked up her glass. She finished her dinner. And on the drive home, something that had been slowly becoming clear became fully clear. She did not confront him that night. She had learned over 16 years of marriage that confrontation without preparation was just noise. She went home. She sat at her desk. And she began to think with the same precision she brought to every financial problem about what her actual position was, not emotionally, but structurally. What did she own? What could she prove she had contributed? What would a court, a mediator, or an auditor say about her role in the company if they were given access to the full record? The answers she arrived at over the following weeks were both reassuring and alarming. Reassuring because her contribution was enormous and well documented. Alarming because the ownership structure of the company did not reflect that contribution in a way that would protect her if the marriage ended. That was a problem. And Serena had spent her entire career solving problems before they became emergencies. She called Patricia Morse the following Monday. Patricia Morse was a corporate attorney in Atlanta who had been Serena's closest friend since they had met at a Howard University alumni event in 2001. Patricia listened to everything. Then she said something that Serena would think about for the next 8 years. She said, "Serena, the work is real. The question is whether the record is real. Let's make the record real." And that was where it began. What Serena began in the fall of 2015 was not a plan for divorce. It was a plan for protection. She began systematically organizing documentation of her contribution to the Caldwell Group, not by removing anything from the company files, but by creating a parallel personal archive of the work she had already done. Financial models with her authorship timestamps. Email chains where her analysis had driven major decisions. Meeting notes where her recommendations were recorded. She was not building a case. She was building a record. The distinction mattered to her deeply. A case is an attack. A record is a fact. She put this record in a thick manila folder that she kept in a locked drawer in her home office. She labeled that folder with one word: after. Before we get to what happened at that cemetery, I need to tell you who Gloria Harris actually was. Not as a symbol, not as a plot point, as a person. Because Gloria Harris was a person who deserves to be known. She was born in Memphis in 1951, the third of 4 children in a household where there was never quite enough of anything except love and expectation. Her father worked at a postal distribution center. Her mother cleaned houses. They were people who believed that the next generation was the point, that everything they did was for what came after them. Gloria absorbed that belief completely and made it the organizing principle of her own life. She was an excellent student, a gifted reader, and a natural teacher of other people. She went to a teacher's college in Tennessee on a partial scholarship and graduated in 1973, having already decided that she was going to spend her life in a classroom. She married a man named Robert Harris in 1975. He was a good man who worked hard and meant well, and who died of a heart attack at the age of 38 in 1982, when Serena was 9 years old. The loss was devastating in every dimension: emotional, financial, practical. Gloria was 31 years old with a 9-year-old daughter, a mortgage, and a teacher's salary. She made a decision in the weeks after Robert's funeral that Serena would only fully understand much later in her own life. Gloria decided that she was going to be fine. Not that she was going to try to be fine. She decided it. The way you decide to take a turn on a road. Then she packed Robert's clothes, kept his photograph on the mantle, told Serena that her daddy had loved them both completely, and that the best way to honor that love was to live well and work hard and always be kind to people who were trying. Then she went back to her classroom on Monday morning. Gloria retired from teaching in 2012 after 31 years in the same school, in a ceremony where 3 generations of her former students came back to honor her. Serena flew to Memphis for it. She sat in the 3rd row and watched her mother receive a standing ovation from a room full of people whose lives she had touched in ways that could not be measured or contained. There was a student there who was a doctor now. There was one who was a judge. There was one who ran a nonprofit that served at-risk youth. Every one of them had a glorious story, a moment where she had said the specific thing they needed to hear, or seen the specific thing in them that nobody else had bothered to see. Serena did not cry at the ceremony. She lasted until the drive to the restaurant afterward, alone in the rental car. She cried for 12 minutes. Then she fixed her face and walked into the restaurant and toasted her mother with champagne. Gloria was diagnosed with congestive heart failure in the spring of 2018. She was 67 years old. The diagnosis was serious, but manageable with medication and monitoring. Gloria received this news with the same clarity she had applied to every other difficult thing in her life. She adjusted her diet. She took her medication. She attended her appointments. She told Serena calmly and completely, and she asked Serena not to worry out loud about it, because worrying out loud took energy that both of them needed for other things. She continued to live in the house on the south side of Memphis. She grew tomatoes in the back garden. She went to church every Sunday. She called Serena every Sunday evening, which meant there were some weeks when Serena called her mother twice in a single day, once from Gloria and once from Serena, and both of them pretended this was coincidental, and neither of them mentioned the diagnosis during those second calls. Over the next 2 years, Gloria's health fluctuated in the way that heart conditions do. Serena flew to Memphis every 6 weeks. She paid for a part-time home health aide to check in 3 times a week. She called the cardiologist directly after every appointment to get the full picture. She managed her mother's medical situation the same way she managed everything, with complete attention and total preparation. Deshawn came to Memphis with her 4 times in 2 years. He was polite to Gloria and attentive in the way of a man who understood that effort was expected. Gloria was always gracious with him. She had a way of being warmly present with people she did not entirely trust. Not cold, not distant, but calibrated. Serena noticed this. She had noticed it for years. She had filed it away next to all the other things she had filed away. Gloria Harris died on a Tuesday morning in October of 2021. She was 68 years old. Serena was in Atlanta when the call came at 6:40 in the morning. She was in the kitchen. She was still in her robe. She answered on the second ring. She listened to the hospice nurse. She said thank you. She hung up. She stood in her kitchen for a few minutes without moving. Then she called Patricia. Then she called the airline. Then she went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself, for exactly 20 minutes, to feel the full size of what had just happened. Then she began to pack. She was packing her black dress when she noticed Deshawn's phone lighting up on the nightstand with a message she was not supposed to see. She did not stop packing, but she read it. And everything she had suspected for the past year became, in that single moment, confirmed. The message on Deshawn's phone was from the Caldwell Group's primary commercial attorney. It said, "Transfers filed this morning. Confirmation by end of day." Serena read it once. She put the phone back exactly where it had been, face down at the same angle. She finished packing. She zipped her bag. She carried it downstairs. And she did not say a single word about it to Deshawn. Not because she was in shock. Because she already knew, had known, in the deep knowing way that a woman who has been paying close attention for years knows things, that something like this was eventually going to happen. She had just not known the exact form it would take. Now she did. She called Patricia from the car on the way to the airport and said 4 words. "It has started." Patricia said, "I know. I have been ready." The transfers Deshawn had filed that Tuesday morning were asset reclassification documents. What he had done, in the most direct terms, was initiate a series of legal maneuvers designed to move the Caldwell Group's most valuable properties from the primary company structure, where Serena's CFO position gave her a claim to their value, into a series of subsidiary LLCs that he and Jerome had quietly formed over the preceding 18 months. On paper, if these transfers completed without challenge, the company that Serena had spent 19 years building would consist largely of its operational shell, the name, the lease obligations, the accounts receivable, while the actual valuable real estate assets sat in entities that she had no documented stake in. He had chosen the morning of Gloria's death to file. He had calculated that her grief would keep her distracted for long enough that the transfers would complete before she noticed. He had been planning this for at least 18 months. Serena had suspected it for 14. The folder called after had been started 3 years earlier, in 2018, when she had first noticed a pattern of small financial adjustments in the company accounts that did not correspond to any operational decision she had been part of. She had documented every one of those adjustments. She had asked David Chen, the forensic accountant Patricia had connected her with in 2019, to review the company's financial records going back to 2015. David Chen had spent 4 months on that review. His report documented 27 instances of what he described as strategic asset repositioning, a pattern of decisions that, taken individually, might each have an innocent explanation, but taken together, across a 5-year period, described a deliberate and systematic effort to restructure the company's value away from its shared structure and into entities controlled exclusively by Deshawn. Serena flew to Memphis. She organized Gloria's arrangements with the same competence she brought to everything. She chose the flowers, yellow roses, because Gloria had always said yellow roses were the most honest flower, the ones that didn't try to be anything other than what they were. She organized the service. She received the people who came to the house the evening before the funeral, and she listened to every story and thanked every person and held herself together in the way that Gloria had taught her by example. She called Patricia twice from the bathroom. Patricia said the same thing both times. "We are ready. Nothing is moving. When you say go, we go." Serena said, "Not yet. Not until after tomorrow." The morning of the funeral was gray and cold and raining in the way that Memphis sometimes rains in October. A steady, low, patient rain that makes the whole city feel quiet and close. Serena stood at the front of the gathering, closest to the grave, holding the yellow roses. The minister read. The choir sang. Former students of Gloria's who had driven in from Birmingham and Nashville and Jackson stood in the rain, without complaining, and listened to the words being said about a woman who had shaped them. About 14 minutes into the service, Serena heard Deshawn's footsteps moving through the wet grass behind her, not toward the grave, but away from it. She heard him stop about 20 feet back. She heard, very faintly, the sound of a phone call connecting. She did not turn around. She did not turn around because she had already decided, on the plane to Memphis, that she was not going to give him the satisfaction of seeing her notice. Not here. Not at her mother's grave. Whatever was happening 20 feet behind her was already handled or would be handled. Patricia had already engaged the attorneys. David Chen's report was already filed. The sealed envelope, the one Serena had written 18 months earlier, the one that named a specific dollar figure, was already in Patricia's office safe. There was nothing Deshawn could do in the next 10 minutes that had not already been accounted for. So Serena stood at her mother's grave with yellow roses in her hands, and she said goodbye to Gloria Harris properly. That was the only thing that mattered in that cemetery. Everything else could wait. On the flight back to Atlanta 2 days later, Serena made a final decision about timing. She could wait and allow Deshawn to believe the transfers had gone through unnoticed, or she could move now, immediately, before he had time to make any additional adjustments. By the time the plane landed, she had decided. She called Patricia from the jet bridge before she even collected her bag. She said one word, go. Patricia had the emergency injunction filed with the court before midnight. The injunction froze all Caldwell Group assets in their current legal state, pending a full forensic accounting. Everything stopped. Nothing moved. Deshawn received the legal notification the following morning. Serena was already at Patricia's office when his first call came through. The morning after the injunction was filed, Serena woke up at 5:45. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table with the coffee and a yellow legal pad, and she wrote down every decision she needed to make in the next 7 days, in order of urgency. The list had 11 items on it. She wrote them in the clear, precise handwriting she had developed at Howard, the handwriting of a person who believed that clarity on the page produces clarity in the mind. When she was done, she read it through twice, made 2 small adjustments, and put the pad in her bag. Then she showered, dressed in a burgundy blazer and dark slacks, and drove to Patricia's office for a 7 a.m. meeting. Deshawn had called 14 times since the legal notification had been delivered. Serena had not answered any of them. Every call answered was an opportunity to say something inadvertent. Silence was not cruelty. Silence was legal strategy. Deshawn's attorneys filed a response to the injunction within 48 hours. The response argued that the asset transfers were a standard business restructuring exercise, that they had been disclosed to the company's board, and that the injunction was an unnecessary and disproportionate legal action by a party who had no legitimate basis for surprise. Patricia read the response. She noted 3 specific claims in it that were directly contradicted by documents in the folder called After. She highlighted the contradictions in yellow. She told Serena, "They have told us exactly where they are weakest. We will go directly at all 3 of these." And she did. Serena moved out of the family home and into a furnished apartment the following week. She had arranged this in advance, had quietly secured the apartment 2 months earlier, had moved the most important personal items in 2 trips over 2 weekends when Deshawn was traveling for work. The apartment was clean and quiet. She called Gloria's house number once. The first morning she woke up in the apartment, before she remembered. The phone rang and rang. She sat for a moment. Then she made coffee. It was the first time since her mother's death that she had allowed herself to sit with the grief fully, without needing to be somewhere or do something immediately afterward. She sat with it for about 40 minutes. Then she put her phone on the kitchen table and began her day. Jerome Hayes called her on a Thursday evening in the 3rd week after the injunction. Jerome had been Deshawn's business partner for 22 years. He was also, Serena had always believed, a man with a genuine moral conscience who had been increasingly uncomfortable with what he had been watching for the past several years. The call lasted 40 minutes. At the end of the call, Jerome said, "I want to be useful here, Serena. Tell me what that looks like." Serena told him. Jerome said he would need to speak with his own attorney first. She said she understood. He called back within the week. His attorney had accompanied him to a meeting with Patricia at which Jerome Hayes provided a voluntary sworn statement covering 12 pages. Those 12 pages described, in the specific detail that only a business partner has access to, the timeline and the intent behind the asset transfers. It was, Patricia would later say, the single most important document in the entire case. The folder called After had been started in the fall of 2018 when Serena first noticed the pattern of small financial adjustments in the Caldwell Group accounts. By the time the injunction was filed in October of 2021, 3 years later, the folder contained 6 tabbed sections, each organized with the precision of a woman who had spent her career making sure that every number could be traced back to its origin. The first section was what Serena called the baseline. A complete documented record of every significant financial decision at the Caldwell Group between 2003 and 2018, with source documents, email correspondence, and meeting notes establishing her direct involvement in each decision. This section alone ran to 140 pages. It had been built document by document over 3 years, one piece at a time, on evenings and weekends, entirely in private, with no indication to Deshawn that anything had changed in how Serena was approaching her own relationship to the company she had helped build. The second section covered the restructuring period, the 5 years between 2015 and 2020 during which David Chen's forensic review had identified the 27 instances of strategic asset repositioning. For each of the 27 instances, Serena had assembled the original company documentation, her own contemporaneous notes noting that the adjustment had seemed unusual to her at the time, and where available, email correspondence that either included or excluded her from the decision. When you can show a court that a person who was integral to every major financial decision for 15 years was suddenly and consistently excluded from a specific category of decisions over a 5-year period, you are showing the court something that does not have an innocent explanation. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The third section was David Chen's complete forensic accounting report, 63 pages detailing the complete financial history of the company and the specific mechanism by which the value of its primary assets had been systematically moved, over 5 years, into subsidiary entities. The fourth section was Serena's own valuation record, a line-item analysis of the precise dollar value of her contribution to the Caldwell Group from 2003 through 2021. This was not a rough estimate or a broad claim. It was a line-by-line calculation. The specific financial decisions she had made, the documented outcomes of those decisions, the value those outcomes had added, and the standard compensation that a CFO of her expertise and tenure would have received in the open market for the same work. The figure she arrived at, the one she wrote in clean numerals at the bottom of the final page and then placed in a sealed envelope in Patricia's safe, reflected 19 years of work at the highest tier. The fifth section covered the marriage record, the documented history of Serena's personal financial contributions to the household over 19 years. Every dollar she had ever put into the household or the company was traceable to a source document. There were no gaps in the record. There were no undocumented periods. The sixth and final section was what Serena simply called letters. 11 of them, each handwritten on plain white paper, not legal documents. The letters Serena had written to herself across the 3 years of building the folder. Letters documenting specific conversations, specific moments, specific decisions that had no paper trail because they had happened in rooms without witnesses. Patricia had told Serena early on to write things down when they happened, in real time, in her own words, with dates. Serena had done this with the same discipline she brought to everything. The letters were precise, specific, and completely consistent with every documented fact in the other 5 sections. Patricia reviewed the complete folder in a single session in the first week of November 2021. She read every page. She made notes in the margins. She asked Serena for clarifying questions. Then she put the folder down on the conference table and looked at Serena for a moment without speaking. She said, "Serena, I have been practicing law for 26 years. I have never, in 26 years, seen a client walk into my office with documentation this complete. This is not a case we are going to build. This is a case that is already built. What we are about to do is present it. There is a difference." Serena heard this. She nodded once. Then she asked when the first deposition could be scheduled. Patricia Morse had grown up in a small city in Ohio, the daughter of a high school principal and a nurse. She went to Georgetown for her undergraduate degree and to Emory Law School in Atlanta. She and Serena had first crossed paths at a Howard alumni event in 2001, had talked for most of the evening about Atlanta real estate and what it meant to be a woman in a professional environment that noticed your outcomes, but not always your methods. They had exchanged numbers. They had had lunch the following week. By the end of that year, they were the kind of friends who could call each other about anything at any hour. Patricia had spent 26 years building a reputation in Atlanta business law that was based entirely on preparation. She was not the kind of attorney who was famous for courtroom theatrics or aggressive litigation tactics. She was the kind of attorney who won cases before they reached the courtroom by building records so complete, so internally consistent, and so thoroughly documented that opposing counsel would eventually reach a point where the rational choice was to settle rather than to put the record in front of a judge. She had won major business disputes, complex contract cases, and several high-stakes asset valuation proceedings, and in nearly every case, she had won them at the negotiating table rather than at trial. Not because she feared the courtroom, because she believed that justice achieved efficiently was better than justice achieved expensively. When Serena had first called her in 2015, that Monday call after the Buckhead closing dinner, Patricia had listened for 45 minutes without interrupting. At the end, she had said, "I want to help you with this. I also want to be honest with you about something. This is not an emergency yet. The way you protect yourself from an emergency is to prepare now, before it becomes one. I can guide you on what to document, what to preserve, what to organize. You do the work. I hold the plan. When it becomes an emergency, if it does, we will be ready." That was the arrangement they had operated under for 6 years. Serena documenting, Patricia advising. Both of them understanding that if the moment came, the preparation would be the difference between a devastating outcome and a just one. Patricia had known about the asset restructuring for 14 months before the funeral. Serena had brought her the first indicators in August of 2020, and Patricia had engaged David Chen shortly thereafter. She had been monitoring the situation closely, updating the legal strategy as new information arrived, preparing the injunction paperwork so that it could be filed within hours of a triggering event rather than days or weeks. When the triggering event came on the morning of Gloria's death, with the message about transfers filed, Patricia had been ready before Serena's plane landed in Memphis. When the word came from the jet bridge, Patricia had the paperwork filed before midnight. Patricia had one rule about the case that she communicated to Serena at the beginning and repeated at every major stage. We do not respond emotionally to anything they do. We respond strategically. If they make an aggressive move, we make a precise one. If they make a claim, we respond with documentation. If they try to make this about your character or your marriage or your motives, we redirect to the numbers and the record every single time. The numbers and the record are the entire case. It requires only that someone with authority read the documents and apply the law. That is what we are asking for. Nothing more. There was one moment during the case's early weeks that Patricia remembered specifically when she later spoke about it. Serena had called her on a Sunday evening and mentioned that she had found something in a box of Gloria's papers, a letter Gloria had written to Serena on the occasion of her Howard University graduation in 1995, which had been misaddressed and returned to sender and had sat in a drawer in Gloria's house for 26 years. In the letter, Gloria had written, among other things, "Whatever you build it so that it is yours. Not shared, not borrowed, not dependent on someone else's goodwill. Yours." Patricia listened to this. After a long pause, she said, "Your mother knew you were going to need that. Even then." David Chen had been doing forensic accounting for 29 years. He had started his career as a standard auditor, had spent the first decade learning how money moved legitimately through organizations, and had then spent the next 2 decades learning how money moved, when people were trying to make sure nobody noticed where it was going. He had worked on cases involving public companies, private equity funds, family businesses, and municipal governments. He had testified as an expert witness in federal court 11 times. He was not a flashy person. He was a man who believed that numbers told stories more reliably than people did, and that his job was to read those stories accurately and describe them precisely. When Patricia brought him onto the Caldwell Group review in late 2020, she described the engagement in one sentence. There is a woman who has built something and a man who is trying to make that something disappear. Tell me what the numbers say. David Chen looked at the numbers for 4 months. The foundation of his analysis was a complete reconstruction of the Caldwell Group's financial history from 2015 through 2021. He began with the company's formal financial records, tax filings, audited statements, bank records, and property transaction documents. He then compared those formal records to the internal operational documents that Serena had compiled from her role as CFO. What this comparison revealed was a consistent pattern. The formal external records showed a company performing normally, growing steadily, making routine business decisions. The internal operational records showed something different, a series of decisions that did not appear in the external record, and that could only be understood in context by someone who understood both sets of documents simultaneously. The 27 instances of strategic asset repositioning that David Chen identified were not all of equal significance. 12 were relatively minor. 11 were moderate, but 4 of them were, in his professional assessment, unambiguous. These 4 transactions, which had occurred between 2018 and 2021, represented the systematic transfer of the Caldwell Group's 3 most valuable commercial properties and its primary investment account into subsidiary LLC structures that had been formed without Serena's knowledge, without disclosure to the company's board, and without the documentation that such transfers would normally require. The properties in those 3 transactions had an aggregate appraised value of $9.4 million, more than 2/3 of the entire company's assessed value. David Chen met with Serena twice during the course of his review. At their second meeting, near the end of his review, he walked her through his preliminary findings, showing her the documents, explaining his analysis of each one. Serena had seen most of the underlying documents before, but seeing them organized by his analysis, placed in sequence, with the pattern made visible across the full timeline, produced a specific kind of recognition in her. Not surprise, not anger. A kind of deep and quiet confirmation of something she had known, in the way you know things before you have the evidence. In the body, in the attention, in the persistent small unease that never quite went away no matter how much she tried to explain it away. At the end of the walkthrough, she said, "How long did this take him to build?" David Chen said, "Based on the document dates, the systematic restructuring began in 2016 and was substantially complete by early 2021. 5 years. She said, "I noticed it in the fall of 2018. He said, "You noticed it 18 months after it started." She said, "I should have noticed it sooner." He said, "Most people never notice it at all." Serena Mitchell's legal team made 4 primary arguments in response to the injunction and the forensic accounting report. The first argument was that the asset restructuring had been a standard business decision made in consultation with the company's legal and financial advisors, and that Serena, as CFO, had been either informed of or involved in all relevant decisions. This argument was directly contradicted by 3 things. The internal meeting records showing Serena had not been present at the sessions where the restructuring was discussed, the email communications in which the restructuring was referenced without Serena being copied, and David Chen's forensic report, which established the timeline of the restructuring in a way that made the claim of Serena's involvement mathematically impossible. Patricia filed a 40-page response to this argument. It took her team 3 days to write. The second argument was a challenge to Serena's standing specifically, a claim that her role as CFO had been primarily operational and administrative rather than strategic, and that the decisions she was claiming credit for had in fact been executive decisions made by the company's principals, with Serena providing supporting analysis rather than determinative input. Patricia's response included 36 specific documented instances in which Serena's analysis had directly driven a decision that a principal had subsequently endorsed, with the endorsement email following within 24 hours of Serena's recommendation in every single case. Jerome Hayes' sworn statement addressed this argument specifically, noting from his own direct observation that several of the company's most consequential decisions had originated with Serena and been presented by Deschon as his own conclusions. The third argument was a personal one. Deschon's attorneys filed a supplementary motion that characterized Serena as a disgruntled spouse attempting to weaponize marital dissolution proceedings to extract value from a business she had contributed to in a limited capacity. The motion made several claims about Serena's performance as CFO, claims that were either fabricated entirely or were distortions of real events stripped of context. Patricia read this motion aloud to Serena in her office. Serena listened to the entire thing without interrupting. At the end, she asked Patricia one question. "Is any of it true?" Patricia said, "Not one word of it." Serena said, "Then we respond with the record, and we do not spend one more minute on it." Patricia said, "That is exactly what we are going to do." The fourth argument was a procedural challenge to the admissibility of David Chen's forensic report on the grounds that it had been commissioned by an interested party. Patricia had a response prepared before the motion was filed. She also filed a motion requesting that the court commission its own independent forensic review of the Caldwell Group's records, a move that Deschon's attorneys had not anticipated because it called their bluff. If their argument was that David Chen's analysis was biased, the logical remedy was a second independent analysis. Their response to that motion was notably less forceful than their previous filings. Jerome Hayes had known Serena Mitchell since they were both 24 years old. They had met at a commercial real estate conference and had recognized in each other the specific kind of ambition that was going somewhere. Jerome was the relationship person, the one who remembered names and birthdays, and what you had talked about last time. Serena was the deal maker, the one who could look at a property and immediately understand what it could become. Together they had built the Caldwell Group from nothing, and for the first 15 years of that partnership, Jerome had been proud of what they were building and genuinely fond of the man he was building it with. The discomfort had started for Jerome in 2015, the same year it had started for Serena, though Jerome did not know that at the time. He had noticed that Deschon was having conversations with the company's attorneys that Jerome was not included in. He had noticed documents being processed that he had not reviewed in advance. He had raised these observations with Deschon twice, and Deschon had explained them both times in ways that were plausible, but that left Jerome with a residue of unease. He had not pursued it further in those early years because the business was doing well, and because he did not want to damage a partnership that had produced the most significant professional accomplishment of his life. He had also, he would later admit in his sworn statement, understood at some level what was happening and chosen not to look at it directly. That choice was something he had had to sit with. By 2020, Jerome could no longer maintain the choice not to look. Documents were moving through the company at a pace that was clearly not business as usual. Jerome had found himself being asked to sign things quickly, without the usual review period, with explanations that were shorter than they should have been for documents of that significance. In the fall of 2020, he had signed a corporate resolution authorizing the transfer of one of the company's commercial properties to a subsidiary LLC. He had signed it because Deschon had told him it was a tax optimization measure. A week later, he had reviewed the resolution more carefully. He had then called his own attorney. The call from Serena in the third week after the injunction had not surprised Jerome. What surprised him was how she made the call, not with anger, not with accusation, just with directness and with a kind of respect for him as a person. She said, "I know you have been in a difficult position for a while. I am not calling to make your position harder. The truth about what happened is already documented in ways that do not require your cooperation. But if you want to tell the truth in your own words, on your own terms, that option is available." He asked for a week to speak with his own attorney. She gave him the week without following up. He called back within the week. The 12-page sworn statement that Jerome Hayes provided covered 5 years of his direct observation of the Caldwell Group's restructuring process. It was specific, chronological, and internally consistent with every document in Serena's folder. It addressed his own role in the process directly, without minimizing his participation. He had been a participant. He had signed documents. He said so in the statement. He said so because he believed that the only way to come out of this with his integrity intact was to tell the truth completely and let the legal process decide what to do with it. Patricia received Jerome's sworn statement on a Thursday morning. She called Serena at 5 o'clock. She said, The statement closes the one remaining gap in the documentary record, the question of intent. Everything else we have proves what happened. Jerome's statement proves why it happened. A court assigns consequences to why. With this statement, we have both. The deposition of Serena Mitchell took place on a Tuesday morning in December of 2021 in a conference room on the 14th floor of Patricia's building in Midtown Atlanta. Serena arrived in a charcoal gray suit. He was composed, prepared, and accompanied by attorneys who were very good at their jobs. Serena was not present in the room. She had chosen not to be, at Patricia's recommendation and for her own reasons. She spent the morning of the deposition in a coffee shop 3 blocks away, with a yellow legal pad and a cup of coffee, working through a financial model for one of her consulting clients. She was not distracted. The deposition was being handled. Her job that morning was to be a person who had other work to do. Patricia had organized her 47 questions into 8 groups. The first 2 groups established the basic facts of Serena's role in the company and the facts of Serena's role, her title, her responsibilities, the scope of her authority. Serena answered these questions without significant difficulty. The answers he gave established a set of facts that the third group of questions would put under considerable pressure. The third group addressed the restructuring directly. Patricia asked Serena to describe, in his own words, the business rationale for each of the 4 primary asset transfers. He gave those answers. They were coherent and professionally presented, and each one was directly contradicted by a document that Patricia placed on the table after the answer was given. Not after she challenged the answer. After she simply listened to it, thanked him for it, and then set a document in front of him. The fourth group of questions addressed the meetings Serena had not been invited to. Patricia had the invitation records, the calendar entries, the attendance logs. She asked Serena to explain, for each meeting, why Serena had not been included. His initial answer was that her presence had not been required for those specific discussions. Patricia then placed in front of him a series of documents showing that the decisions made in each of those meetings had directly affected the company's financial structure in ways that fell unambiguously within Serena's CFO responsibilities. She asked him to explain the decision to exclude the CFO from meetings that would produce decisions within the CFO's area of responsibility. He answered. She listened. She placed another document. This continued for 40 minutes. The fifth group of questions addressed the morning of Gloria's death. Patricia asked Serena to describe his activities on the morning of October 12, 2021. She asked about the communication he had sent to the company's attorney that morning. Transfers filed this morning, confirmation by end of day. He confirmed the communication. She asked him to explain the timing. Why that specific morning? His attorney objected. Patricia rephrased. He answered. The answer was that the timing was coincidental and related only to the completion of a legal process that had been ongoing for some time. Patricia said, I see. She made a note. She moved to the sixth group. The sixth group addressed Jerome Hayes' sworn statement. Patricia placed the complete 12-page statement in front of Serena and asked whether the facts described were accurate. He said some were, and some were not. She placed documents addressing each disputed fact. The court reporter's machine kept its quiet, steady rhythm. Patricia finished the 47th question at 12:45 in the afternoon. She gathered her documents and walked to the coffee shop where Serena was sitting. She said, it went exactly as expected. Question by question, answer by answer, document by document. She told Serena everything. When Patricia finished, Serena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, what happens now? Patricia said, now his attorneys go back to him, and they explain what the next 6 months look like if this goes to trial, and they compare that to what a negotiated settlement looks like. And then someone picks up a phone. Someone picked up a phone 18 days later. It was his lead attorney's number on the screen. Patricia answered on the first ring. She said, I've been expecting your call. The call from Serena's lead attorney came on a Thursday afternoon in January of 2022. He told Patricia that his client was prepared to enter into settlement discussions. Patricia said she agreed. She told him that Serena had a figure in mind, and that the figure was documented in a manner that he would find compelling. She told him that the figure was in a sealed envelope in her office safe, that it had been placed there 18 months earlier, and that neither she nor Serena would be the first party to name a number in the negotiations. If his client wanted to open discussions, his client was going to have to put a number on the table first. He said he would be in touch. The negotiations were conducted over 4 sessions across 3 weeks. Deshawn's team opened the first session with a figure. Patricia wrote it on her legal pad. She called Serena from her car. Serena listened to the figure. There was a pause. Then Serena said, "That is 43% below my number." Patricia said, "I know." Serena said, "Come back with my number at the second session." At the second session, Patricia presented Serena's figure. Holloway's reaction was controlled but visible, a slight adjustment in his posture, the kind of physical response that an experienced negotiator produces only when something genuinely surprises them. He came back to the third session with a counter that was higher than the first offer, but substantially below Serena's figure. Patricia presented a response brief at the third session, 22 pages documenting the specific basis for every component of Serena's figure. Before the fourth session, Holloway called Patricia privately. He named a new figure. It was closer to Serena's number than anything that had been offered before. It was not Serena's number. Patricia called Serena. Serena listened. She said, "That is 9% below my number." She was quiet. Then she said, "Patricia, do you think they will reach my number?" Patricia said, "I think the decision about whether they reach your number needs to be made with the envelope on the table. I think it is time." Serena said, "I agree. Bring the envelope to the fourth session." The fourth and final settlement session took place on a Tuesday morning in February of 2022. Patricia arrived with the sealed envelope in a document folder. She placed the folder on the table at the start of the session, but did not open it. The session proceeded. At the point where the discussion had reached a natural pause, Patricia reached into the document folder. She placed the sealed envelope on the conference table. She said, "I want to show both parties something. This envelope was sealed by my client and placed in my office safe 18 months ago. The date of sealing is notarized on the outside of the envelope. I am going to open it now, in this room, so that everyone present can see its contents for the first time." She opened the envelope. Inside the envelope was a single folded page. On that page, in Serena's precise handwriting, was a figure, a specific dollar amount with a detailed breakdown of the calculation behind it. Patricia read the figure aloud. The room was very quiet. The figure on the page was the same figure, not approximately the same, not in the same range, the identical figure, down to the dollar, that Serena had been asking for from the very first moment her number had been placed on the table. She had calculated, 18 months before negotiations began, without access to any information about what Deshawn's team might offer, the exact dollar value of her contribution to the Caldwell Group. And she had been right. Patricia allowed the silence in that room to exist for a full 30 seconds. Then she said, "My client calculated this figure 18 months ago based on 19 years of documented contribution to the Caldwell Group. The figure is the same figure she asked for at the beginning of these negotiations. I am presenting the envelope to demonstrate that this is not a negotiating position. It is not a number arrived at in response to your client's offer. It is a finding, and findings of this precision, by a CFO with this level of documentation behind her, tend to hold up extremely well in front of judges." Holloway called for a recess. He left the room for 22 minutes. When he came back, he said that his client was prepared to accept Serena's figure in full. The settlement agreement was signed on a Thursday in March of 2022. The total figure was $7,422,000. That was the number Serena had written on the page that had been in the sealed envelope for 18 months. That was the number she had calculated in a home office on a quiet evening in the summer of 2020, sitting alone at her desk with her reading glasses on, and a yellow legal pad and a calculator, working through 19 years of contribution line by line with the precision of a woman who had been trained to find what was missing in a set of numbers and who had applied that training to the record of her own life. $7,422,000. Not a round number. Not an aspirational number. A calculated number. A found number. The number that the work was worth when you applied standard market methodology to a 19-year record that was documented at a level that forensic accounting had confirmed was accurate in every detail. When Patricia told her the settlement had been accepted in full, Serena was sitting in her apartment at the kitchen table. She had a cup of coffee. It was 7:30 in the morning. She did not react the way people imagine someone reacts when they learn they have won something significant. She did not cry. She did not make a sound. She sat with the information for a moment in the way that she sat with all significant information, quietly, letting it become real at its own pace. Then she picked up her coffee. She drank it. She thought about Gloria. She thought about the drive to the airport on the morning of Gloria's death, and the call to Patricia, and the 4 words she had said, "It has started." And Patricia's answer, "I know. I have been ready." She thought about how much of what had just happened had been built in private, in silence, over years, by 2 women who had trusted each other completely and had prepared for every contingency and had been right about most of them. $7,422,000 was the legal accounting of what Serena had built. It was not the complete accounting. The complete accounting was not something that could be contained in a settlement agreement. It included the 11 years of watching her mother come home in a waitress uniform at midnight and covering her daughter with a blanket without waking her. It included the Sunday phone calls from Washington, D.C. and later from Atlanta. It included the 31 years of Gloria Harris standing in front of a classroom and telling children that what they knew and what they prepared could never be taken from them. It included the yellow roses at the grave. It included the folder started on a quiet evening in 2018 and built page by page over 3 years. The $7,422,000 was what the law could see. Everything behind it was what made Serena Mitchell the woman who could calculate that number with exactness and trust it completely. In the spring of 2022, Serena Mitchell registered a new company in the state of Georgia. The company provided financial advisory services to small and mid-sized real estate developers. The name of the company was her own, Harris Mitchell Financial. Gloria's name first. In the months after the settlement, Serena lived her life in a way that the people closest to her described as consistent, which was the right word, because consistency had always been how she operated. She woke at 5:45. She made coffee. She worked. She flew to Memphis once a month and visited Gloria's grave with yellow roses and sat for a while in the quiet of the cemetery and did whatever it is that people do when they are talking to someone who is no longer there to answer. She put Gloria's photograph on the mantle of the apartment the same way Gloria had put Robert's photograph on the mantle in Memphis, as a presence, not a memorial. A person still in the room. Harris Mitchell Financial took on its first clients in the summer of 2022. By the end of the year, it had 7. By the following spring, it had 14. Serena had built her client base the way she built everything, methodically, without shortcuts, on the basis of work that was good enough to speak for itself. Within 18 months, she had more work than she could manage alone and had brought on 2 associates. Both of them women. Both of them exactly the kind of precise, prepared, deeply capable people that Serena had been looking for without quite knowing it. She had a conversation with Patricia in the fall of 2022, over dinner at a restaurant they had been going to for years, about what the previous 12 months had felt like from the inside. She described it in terms that surprised Patricia, not as a war that had been won, but as a clarification. She said, "For a long time I was building something that was real, but I was building it inside a structure that did not fully acknowledge that it was real. Now the structure is gone, and the work is still here. The work was always the thing. I just needed the structure to stop being in the way of it." Patricia had said that was one of the best descriptions she had ever heard of what the legal process was actually for. Not punishment. Clarification. She still has the folder called after. It is in a locked drawer in her office. She has never needed to open it again. But she has never thrown it away either. There are things you keep not because you need them, but because they are proof of who you were when the test came. This story is not about a divorce. It is not about a man who did a bad thing, though a man did a bad thing. It is not even primarily about the legal process, though the legal process worked the way it is supposed to work when you have prepared it to. This story is about what Gloria Harris understood when she was standing in the driveway, watching a car carrying her daughter disappear around a corner. She understood that she could not protect Serena from everything. What she could do, and what she did, for 18 years before Serena left for Washington, D.C., and for 26 more years after that, was give Serena a way of thinking about herself and about preparation and about what belongs to you that no one could take away. You cannot prepare for every specific crisis, but you can prepare a person to be the kind of person who, when the crisis comes, already knows what to do. There are things in this story that speak directly to every woman who has ever built something inside a structure that was not built to protect her. Who has ever been the person whose work drove the outcome and whose name did not appear in the announcement? Who has ever found herself in a marriage, or a business, or a family arrangement where her contribution was foundational and her standing was assumed rather than documented. If you are that person, if any part of this story recognized itself in your own situation, the lesson from Serena's story is not to plan for divorce or to distrust the people in your life. The lesson is much simpler and much older than that. Build the record, not because you expect to need it, because having it means you never have to fight about what is real. The record makes the real things findable, and real things, once found, are very hard to argue away. The second lesson is about timing. Serena did not start building the folder called After in a panic. She started it when she noticed something that did not sit right. Not a crisis, not a confrontation, just a pattern that did not correspond to the story she was being told. She started it then, calmly, methodically, without drama, and without telling anyone. She built it over 3 years. She built it while continuing to do her job, continuing to be a wife, continuing to call her mother every Sunday. She did not let the building of the folder become an identity or a wound. She kept it in proportion. She kept it moving. And when the moment came that required it, it was ready. Preparation is not pessimism. Preparation is the specific kind of respect you pay to your own future self. The self who is going to be dealing with something you cannot fully predict, and who deserves to arrive at that moment with every advantage you could have built them. The third lesson belongs to Gloria. It is the one she gave Serena when Serena was 7 years old, and then again 1,000 times after that, in the way that the most important lessons get given, not once, with ceremony, but woven into ordinary days until they become so much a part of how you think that they are indistinguishable from your own voice. The two things nobody can ever take from you are what you know and what you have prepared. Everything else in this life can be taken. Knowledge cannot. Preparation cannot. Those belong to you forever. Serena Harris Mitchell knew this when she was 7. She proved it when she was 52. Standing at a grave in the rain with yellow roses in her hands and a man on his phone 20 feet behind her, and a folder in a locked drawer at home, and a number already written on a page already sealed in an envelope already in her attorney's safe. She proved it completely, and the man on the phone never heard her footsteps, because she had already moved. That is the story of Serena Mitchell. Born Serena Harris, in Memphis, Tennessee, to a woman named Gloria Harris who believed that what you know and what you prepare cannot be taken from you. Who left for Howard University with 2 suitcases and a backpack and her mother standing in the driveway until the car turned the corner. Who spent 19 years building something real inside a structure that was not built to protect her. And who, when the moment came, was already 3 years ahead of it. I want to take a moment before we go to acknowledge something. You stayed until the end of this story. That is not nothing. Stories like this one require something from you. Attention, patience, the willingness to sit with complexity until it resolves. You gave all of that. If this story moved you, if it made you think, or made you feel something, or made you reach for your phone to share it with someone who needs to hear it, please do all of those things. Drop a comment below and tell me what stayed with you. Tell me if any part of this story reminded you of someone you know, or something you have lived. Tell me where you are watching from. I read every comment. I mean that. If you are not yet subscribed, please subscribe now. There are more stories coming. Stories of women who prepared, who documented, who stood at graves with yellow roses and already knew what was next. Hit the notification bell. Stay with me. There is so much more to tell.